Here I am back in the camper again. Instead of doing it in either the Quonset hut or the wall tent. But the reason why I'm in the camper is because it's a cold day. A cold day in the latter half of June. And it's supposed to freeze tomorrow morning. Oh boy. Okay. I just want to say one thing about the freezing in tomorrow morning. I set aside some eggs that I wanted the hens to sit on and hatch. Now, it seems that my hens are not that broody. And I'm worried that these eggs are going to die. They're going to freeze tomorrow. There's nothing I can do about it. I got no heater for that place. You got to be careful with heaters in a chicken coop. A lot of chicken coops burn down because of heaters. But I'm not here to talk about the chickens. I'm here to talk about the Bible. Now, I've been talking about doing the a Bible study on independent women in the Bible, and I could come up with about 4 of them, and I looked up a list of independent women online, and I could come up with 11 of them from about 2 or 3 different sources. But I didn't agree with all of them, because some of them are just barely mentioned in the Bible. Some of them I didn't agree with. One of them I definitely have a problem with, and that is Moses' sister Miriam. And it's a personal problem, because Miriam and her brother Aaron also complained about Moses marrying an Ethiopian woman. And, well, the women who stuck with me longest, during my years of backsliding and running around and living with women, were the African American ones. And I'm trying to be politically correct in my nomenclature. But anyhow, so I've been studying. I studied through Ruth the past few weeks, and I was struck how the one woman that came to my top of my mind when I was thinking about independent women was Tamar. And Tamar and Ruth, even though I didn't think of Ruth as an independent woman, I still don't. And I'll tell you why when we talk about it. But Tamar was an independent woman. But Ruth was a little shy. But they have one thing in common: Levirate marriage. Now, Levirate marriage is when a man dies married without leaving any children. His wife marries his brother, to continue his name, in the clan or in the family or nation. Now, I used to think that Levirate marriage was called Levirate because of Levi, the tribe where the priests came from, and the temple ministers. But I found out, no, it's not. Because I thought, why would Tamar be engaged in a Levirate marriage in Genesis before the law was given, before even the tribes were established? Now, the patriarchs of the tribe were living because she was married to the son of one of them. But we'll get into that later. But I found out by researching online is that Levirate marriage does not come from the tribe of Levi, gets its name from that, but it gets its name from the Latin levir, Levir, which means brother, something like that. Anyhow, that was just a kind of an interesting thing where I just assumed that it had Levi at the start of it, that it had to do with the tribe of Levi, but it doesn't. So the Levirate marriage was happening before the law was given, but it was also established in the law. I'm not going to read those parts of the Bible, but it was established in the law of Moses in both Deuteronomy and the book of Leviticus. So anyhow, now I think we should go excuse me. Let's go to Genesis chapter 38. And it's going to be too much reading, so I'm going to have to fill in with just, I'll do a little bit of reading, and then I'll fill in by telling the story. Okay, so, yes, here's my Bible readings here. We're going to read out of Genesis chapter 38 about Judah and Tamar. Okay, so Judah was married. He had some kids. And let's see. In the course of time, Judah arranged for his firstborn son Er, to marry a young woman named Tamar. But was a wicked man in the Lord's sight, so the Lord took his life. Then Judah said to Er's brother Onan, "Go and marry Tamar, as our law requires of the brother of a man who has died." Now see where it says here, our law requires, it was just a custom then. And it was a custom that was not only practiced by Israelites, but by other related peoples, and even down in Africa there are tribes that practice that today, where if a man dies and he has no children to carry on his name, the widow will marry the brother, and any children from that will be considered her first husband's son. Anyhow, in the course of time, oh, I already read that. Go and marry Tamar, as our law requires of the brother of a man who has died. You must produce an heir for your brother. But Onan was not willing to have a child who would not be his own heir. So whenever he had intercourse with his brother's wife, he spilled the semen on the ground. Now, yeah, that's where a lot of people think that is why masturbation is a sin. It's not just that. It's not just the waste of semen, because that happens anyhow. But men sleep sometimes, especially when they're young. Anyhow, this prevented her from having a child who would belong to his brother. But the Lord considered it evil for Onan to deny a child to his dead brother, so the Lord took Onan's life too. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, "Go back to your parents' home and remain a widow until my son Shelah is old enough to marry you." I was going to say Sheila, because that's the way I think of it in my mind, but it sounds too much like a woman's name in our culture, so I decided Shelah is probably the better way to pronounce that name. But Judah didn't really intend to do this because he was afraid Shelah would also die, like his two brothers. So Tamar went back to live in her father's home. Now, it goes on here talking about his wife died, Judah's wife, and he's going to get he's going to some sheep, to find some sheep. Anyhow, him and a friend will take off to go find some sheep. Now, Tamar was aware that Shelah had grown up, but no arrangements had been made for her to come and marry him. So she changed out of her widow's clothing and covered herself with a veil to disguise herself. Then she sat beside the road at the entrance to the village Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. Judah noticed her and thought she was a prostitute, since she had covered her face. So he stopped and propositioned her. "Let me have sex with you," he said, not realizing that she was his own daughter-in-law. "How much will you pay to have sex with me?" Tamar asked. "I'll send you a young goat for my flock," Judah promised. "But what will you give me to guarantee that you will send the goat? What kind of guarantee do you want?" Now that guarantee is going to play an important part at the end of the story. She answered, "Leave me your identification seal and its cord and the walking stick you are carrying." So Judah gave them to her. Then he had intercourse with her, and she became pregnant. Afterwards she went back home, took off her veil, and put on her widow's clothing as well. Now see, so then he goes to take the young goat. Him and his friend go back with the young goat to pay and get the stuff that he left as a promise to come back with the goat. A guarantee. He wanted to go pick that up, but she wasn't there. And all the people in that village said, "There's no prostitute that hangs out at this place." And so they decided that, well, we'll just keep it quiet and we'll go back, and now I guess I'll have to get me some new seal and a new walking stick. But anyhow, about 3 months later, Judah was told, "Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has acted like a prostitute, and now because of this she's pregnant. Bring her out and let her be burned," Judah demanded. Kind of hypocrite, huh? But as they were taking her out to kill her, she sent this message to her father-in-law: "The man who owns these things made me pregnant. Look closely. Whose seal and cord and walking stick are these?" Judah recognized them immediately and said, "She is more righteous than I am, because I didn't arrange for her to marry my son Shelah." And Judah never slept with Tamar again. When it came time for Tamar to give birth, it was discovered that she was carrying twins. While she was in labor, one of the babies reached out his hand. The midwife grabbed it and tied a scarlet string around the child's wrist, announcing this one came out first. But then he pulled back his hand and out came his brother. "What?" the midwife exclaimed. "How did you break up first?" So he was named Perez. Remember that name, Perez. And I don't mean the Spanish name. Then the baby with the scarlet string on his hand, on his wrist, was born, and he was named Zerah. Let's go to the book of Ruth and remember about Perez. Back this over again. The story of Ruth. Now, in the days when the judges ruled in Israel, a severe famine came upon the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah left his home and went to live in the country of Moab, taking his wife and 2 sons with him. Okay, so he had 2 sons, took them to Moab. When the law of Moses said you're not supposed to have anything to do with Moab. But he went there, his sons grew up, they got married to Moabite women, and Ruth was one of them. Elimelech died, and Naomi was left with her 2 sons. The 2 sons married Moabite women. One married a woman named Orpah, and the other a woman named Ruth. But about 10 years later, both Mahlon and Chilion died. This left Naomi alone without her 2 sons or husband. So here she is, an Israelite woman. Naomi. Her husband and 2 sons died. She's got no man, no family, except for her daughter-in-laws. Ruth and Orpah. Oh. Then Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had blessed his people in Judah by giving them good crops again. So Naomi and her daughters-in-law got ready to leave Moab to return to her homeland. Okay, so on the way, Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back to your mother's homes, and may the Lord reward you for your kindness to your husbands and to me. May the Lord bless you with the security of another marriage." Then she kissed them goodbye, and they all broke down and wept. Now they both said, "No, we don't want to leave you. We don't want to leave you." But she told them, "Look, I have no more husband. My sons, your husbands are dead, and I'm too old to get married again and have sons. And besides, you'd have to wait for them to grow up to marry them." Now, that is an indication that Levirate marriage was practiced in Moab, because that was a given, that they would be able to marry brothers of their dead husbands. Anyhow, but as she said, that there'd be if I did have kids, you'd have to wait too long, and you'd be old ladies, and they'd still be young. But anyhow, again they wept together, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung tightly to Naomi. "Look," Naomi said, "your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods." Gone back to her gods. "You should do the same." But Ruth replied, "Don't ask me to leave you and turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried." Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her and said nothing more. Oh, they're on their way. Let's go to chapter 2. They got to Bethlehem. This was where Elimelech and Naomi came from. They were in the tribe of Judah. They were Bethlehemites. Does that sound familiar to you? Bethlehem. That's where Jesus was born. Now there was a wealthy and influential man in Bethlehem named Boaz, who was a relative of Naomi's husband Elimelech. One day Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go out into the harvest fields to pick up the stalks of grain left behind by anyone who is kind enough to let me do it." They had to go and pick up whatever was left over from the harvesters. It's called gleaning, and that was in the law of Moses. But it was a practice. It's practiced probably worldwide, where poor people are allowed to go in and pick up what's left over. Now, here in America in the modern times, the agricultural corporations try to get everything they can and leave nothing behind. But back then, God had provided a way for poor people who had no way of making a living to keep living. God is interested in poor people. The blessings of God extend to the poor people, not just to the rich. Sometimes riches can be a curse. There are going to be more rich men in hell than in heaven. Anyhow, so she went out there harvesting, and Okay, let's see, where am I? Let's go down to verse 8. Okay. Well, anyhow, she wound up harvesting in a field she didn't even know, just by happenstance, as the haply, I can't remember how the King James puts it. I'm not reading King James. I'm reading the New Living Bible translation. Not my favorite, but it's easy to understand, which is why I'm reading it. But anyhow, she just happened to wind up in Boaz's field, who was a relative of Naomi and her by marriage. Both of them by marriage, obviously. Anyhow, she winds up in Boaz's field. Boaz sees her and says, "Who is that young woman over there? Who does she belong to?" And the foreman replied, "She is the young woman from Moab who came back with Naomi. She asked me this morning if she could gather grain behind the harvesters. She has been hard at work ever since." She's a hard worker, and he noticed that, and he noticed how pretty she was too. But it doesn't state that. She has been hard at work ever since, except for a few minutes' rest in the shelter. Boaz went over and said to her, "Listen, my daughter, stay right here with us when you gather grain. Don't go to any other fields. Stay right behind the young women working in my field. See which part of the field they are harvesting and then follow them. I have warned the young men not to treat you roughly. And when you are thirsty, help yourself to the water they have drawn from the well." Ruth thanked him. "What have I done to deserve such kindness?" she asked. "I am only a foreigner." "Yes, I know," Boaz replied, "but I also know about everything you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. I have heard how you left your father and mother and your own land to live here among complete strangers. May the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge, reward you fully for what you have done." So she kept on. And she even was invited to have lunch at the break time with the workers and Boaz. Let's go down to verse 17. So Ruth gathered barley there all day, and when she beat out the grain that evening, it filled an entire basket. She carried it back to town to her mother-in-law. Ruth also gave her the roasted grain that was left over from her meal. "Where did you gather all this grain today?" Naomi asked. "Where did you work? May the Lord bless the one who helped you." So Ruth told her mother-in-law about the man in whose field she had worked. She said, "The man I worked with today is named Boaz." "May the Lord bless him," Naomi told her daughter-in-law. "He is showing his kindness to us as well as your dead husband. The man is one of our closest relatives, one of our family redeemers." Well, that Levirate marriage was only part of the law about kinsmen redeemers. Family redeemers, as it puts in this translation. If you got into any kind of financial trouble and had to mortgage your field, your field that gave you food to live on, then somebody from your family could go buy it back for you. And if you were put into slavery because of your debts, a kinsman redeemer, a family redeemer, could go buy you back from your slave master, your slave owner. And especially every 7 years, on the Sabbath years, you couldn't refuse it. You had to give the man back if a kinsman redeemer redeems him. Remember that about kinsman redeemers. It's very important. It's important for you as well as me and Ruth. Okay. So she goes back and she goes back. And at the time of threshing, I think I'm not going to read this part. I've already read too much. Ooh, look at, I'm crumpling this Bible. There was no crumpling on it when I bought it last month. I used Bible with no crumples on it, no writing in it or anything. That tells you something about who owned this Bible before I bought it. They never used it. I was reluctant to write in here because there's no writing. And now that I got a crumple in it, I can write in it. Okay. So anyhow, she goes back, and at the time of threshing, when they thresh in the field, they would have to wait for the wind to come up to blow the chaff away when they beat out the grain. And they would sleep in the fields. So Boaz was sleeping in the fields during the time of threshing, and he'd already noticed her, gave her permission, and treated her very kindly. And I'm sure that he noticed how pretty she was. I'm sure he knows that he could be her kinsman redeemer. But he's kind of, I think he's being more of a gentleman because she's still wearing all her widow clothes. It's not like she's looking for a man. So he's kind of a gentleman. And I think she's kind of shy too. Anyhow, her mother-in-law, Naomi, says, listen, he's our kinsman redeemer. What you need to do is when he's sleeping in the field by his grain, go out there and lay at his feet in night time and sleep at his feet. And then when he notices you, do whatever he tells you to do. That is not a weird thing to do back in those days. That was a way of her reminding him that he can redeem her from her widowhood, as well as buy back the fields that her father-in-law and husbands had owned in Bethlehem, that are obviously in somebody else's hands now. Anyhow, so she does it. And he wakes up in the middle of the night and says, who are you? She says, I'm Ruth, and you are my kinsman redeemer. Spread your skirt over me. That was a way of him answering to her proposal in the customary way. Her proposal and his answer saying yes, he'll do it. And he tells her, go home in the morning before anybody wakes up and don't say anything to anybody. Why? Because it turns out that there's another person who's closer related. So he goes to this fellow the next day and says, hey, you know, you are a close relative of Naomi, the husband. And he had some fields that are in mortgage right now. You can go buy them back. And the guy says, I think I will. I'm going to go buy them back. But the Boaz says, but if you buy them back, you also have to marry Ruth. And this guy said, I don't want to do that because that'll complicate my son's inheritance. In verse 13, so Boaz took Ruth into his home, and she became his wife. Hard to turn these pages, they're so thin. He slept with her. The Lord enabled her to become pregnant, and she gave birth to a son. Then the women of the town said to Naomi, "Praise the Lord, who has now provided a redeemer for your family. May this child be famous in Israel." So Naomi took the baby and cuddled him. She cared for him as if he were her own. The neighbor women said, "Now at last Naomi has a son again," and they named him Obed. He became the father of Jesse and the grandfather of David. This is the genealogical record of their ancestor Perez. Remember Perez from Tamar. Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron was the father of Ram. Ram was the father of Amminadab. And Amminadab was the father of Nahshon. Nahshon was the father of Salmon. Salmon was the father of Boaz. Boaz was the father of Obed. Obed was the father of Jesse. Jesse was the father of David. And on and on and on. If you read the genealogies in Matthew and Luke, it goes to Jesus. Jesus Christ. Tamar was his ancestress, so was Ruth. Tamar, Judah, another ancestor of Jesus, tried to cheat Tamar out of her right to have a kinsman redeemer. Ruth was a Moabite, and under the Mosaic law, she had no right in Israel. But yet she is the ancestor of our Savior, Jesus Christ, who was God manifest in the flesh. In him the fullness of the Godhead dwells bodily. And he is sitting up in heaven right now. And his spirit is wandering this earth, looking for you to give your heart to him. "Behold, I stand at the door and knock, and if any man opens the door, I will come into him and sup with him and he with me." You can have a relationship with Jesus. Fellowship with him. That was Jesus saying that in the book of Revelation, chapter 3, verse 20. So, I'm just wanting to say that it doesn't matter. You can be cheated and cheat back in return, as Tamar did. She really did some spy stuff there, and she almost she was condemned to death because of it. But Judah said, "She's more righteous than I am." And Ruth had no right in Israel because she was of a people who God had condemned, who worshipped a different god. I think their god was Chemosh, maybe. Yeah, I think it was Chemosh. But it doesn't matter, because any god who's not Jehovah God, the great I am, is a false god. So, and look at me. I'm not an Israelite. I'm a Scotch-Irish American. You can't get farther away from Israel. No, actually you can. America's pretty far away from Israel. And I am an American. I can't even count how many generations my people were here before the revolution. Some of them. Not all of them, though. Because I have a grandfather who was an illegal alien from Denmark jumped ship in New York Harbor and swam ashore. But it doesn't matter. Even I can be saved because Jesus died for everyone. Even Ruth, who had no right at all in Israel, but she was an ancestor of the Savior. So think about that. God bless you. Jesus died for everyone.